Hi, my name is Frank Chen. Welcome to the a16z YouTube channel. Now, aside from being your fearless YouTube host, I have a day job here, and my day job is to actually run the investing team. And the way that works is when entrepreneurs are raising money, they'll knock on our door and talk about their vision and basically pitch for an investment. A lot of you have asked, boy, can I go with you to these pitch meetings? Because it would just be fascinating to understand what happens at these pitch meetings. And it would be super interesting to understand, how did you react to the pitch? What slides worked? What slides didn't work? And so this episode is exactly for you. If you've ever wished that you could come with us to the pitch meeting and hear our reactions to it, we've created the YouTube episode for you. So in particular, we're going to meet two entrepreneurs of a company called Sandbox VR that we recently invested in, Zhao and Siqi Chen. And what they're going to do for you is they're going to present their pitch. And then we'll have Andrew Chen, who led our investment in the company, join them on camera, and he's going to talk about how he thought about each slide in their pitch. What worked, what didn't quite work, how he thought about it. And so very rarely do you get to go inside the sausage factory to see how investors and entrepreneurs interact in the context of raising money for their companies. And so I really hope you'll enjoy this inside director's cut look at the fundraising process. Enjoy.
Hi, I'm Andrew Chen, General Partner at Andreessen Horowitz, and today we have Steve and Siqi from Sandbox VR. We're going to talk about a bunch of different topics today. We're going to go through their deck, which they're going to generously share and walk through some of the choices that they made along the way, slide by slide. We're also going to talk through my reaction to the deck, which included a lot of questions, a lot of skepticism, a lot of head scratchers, and we'll discuss how we got to a point that we converged and how I got excited and convicted on investing in the company, and go from there. So, welcome, Steve and Siqi.
Thanks.
Thank you. Awesome. So I know the first thing that happens in these conversations is often there's the formality of this deck where entrepreneurs come and they're presenting about the company. We obviously Siqi, you and I knew each other for many years before this, but maybe as a first step, let's actually run through the deck. Let's do kind of a speed read through it, and then we can talk about kind of some of the choices that you guys made in creating this thing.
Sounds good. So, we're Sandbox VR, we're the holodeck company. So, let's be real. VR has been a disappointment. Adoption has been disappointing. There are 120 million console units worldwide and only 5 million VR headset units. Not only that, engagement has been disappointing. 73% of all VR users churn, right? We wanted the holodeck, but instead we got a disembodied head, right, with floating joysticks, and you're tethered to a computer, sitting by yourself in a chair, home alone.
So, we went and built a freaking holodeck. It's a place where you can be anyone and go anywhere. We have movie quality motion capture technology. It captures every movement of you and your friends. You can high five a friend in VR for real who's next to you. You can go anywhere because you can roam freely about in a fairly large space in our sandboxes. You're untethered by wires. And the thing we hear the most from people who've tried other VR experiences, hey, I didn't get motion sick. And we've got some extreme stories about that, but you can run, walk, crouch, jump, and it all just works. And we put one of these in your neighborhood. So these are some shots from our various locations around the world. That one's from Vancouver. We have one in Hong Kong. We tried to design these places to not feel too sci-fi, but to be more of a cool place for you to hang out with your friends before and after your experiences. And these locations run our AAA sandbox experiences exclusively. So these are the only places where you can play these games that we've built in-house, from Deadwood Mansion, to our pirate experience, Curse of Davy Jones, to our space elevator experience, Amber Sky. And each of these experiences are designed to be as fun to watch as they are to play. Because one of the big things we think about is how do we make these experiences be social from the ground up. And after you play, you get a trailer, you get a selfie video, and these become things that are irresistible to share on social.
Yeah, guests are blown away. Across Facebook, Google, and TripAdvisor, and over thousands of reviews, is near unanimous 5 out of 5. We're actually the #1 activity in both Hong Kong and Singapore in TripAdvisor. We're the #7 activity in Hong Kong, right under Disneyland.
And when you have guest satisfaction like that, you get really strong demand. So, this is a revenue chart for our first 12 or so months of existence. And the first 8 months or so is a sad, flat, slightly declining graph that is hard to raise money off of. But what that actually represents is it's basically 100% occupancy for 6 months straight, morning to night, 7 days a week. And so when we launched our second store in Hong Kong in March last year, it's a much larger store, about 2.5 times the size, and on a per square foot basis, revenue actually went up. And we saw the same thing when we recently launched San Mateo. And in terms of repeat usage, 18% of our guests for just that first test room have booked 2 or more sessions. And this is with us having only the one experience in a really tiny location, no corporate business. We do a lot of team building during the day. And because it's in high rise, there's also no foot traffic whatsoever.
And strong demand drives strong economics. Across our corporate stores, we see a very high EBITDA margin. We have a strong sales per square foot. And what's interesting about our retail store is, if you think about retail, like restaurants or that sells clothing, they have cost of goods sold. We sell time. So we essentially have no cost of goods sold. The economics is very different. And on top of that, our occupancy rate is also very high. And strong economics enables aggressive growth. So we started our first pop-up store in June of 2017. And since then, we've opened in cities such as LA, New York, Bangkok, Vancouver, Toronto, and we have one here in San Mateo, Hillsdale. And soon, by the end of summer, the end of this year, we will go from, we have 14 rooms now, to over 50 rooms. And aggressive growth enables exclusive content. So we're a publisher right now. We are working with external studio to build content for us. But as we scale to hundreds of rooms, we would be able to build a content ecosystem for other developers to build content for us on a much larger scale. And which builds our network effect over time. Strong demand drives strong economics, which drives aggressive growth, which enables exclusive content, and which drives strong demand. Bootstrapping a whole new medium. So we envision that one day these holoplexes, which could be 20 to 40,000 square feet in space, can attract hundreds of users, will be as ubiquitous as movie theaters. The contents that we have will be plastered on billboards and they'll be on trailers. And behind this is a robust ecosystem for top developers and IP content holder to build experiences in our platform.
So why is this all possible now? If you look at the technology that enables that, what we do, it's all just barely possible, and it's all rapidly improving. So the first VR backpack was released in 2016. At this point, fairly underpowered. The ability to do wireless VR is still pretty nascent, and to do 6 people in a confined space, still not possible. Motion capture technology in real time with just a few sensors with multiple users, that was first possible in 2016. The prices will continue to come down, but the quality and the fidelity of tracking will continue to increase. Headsets, the CV1 was from the Oculus Rift was released in 2016. And in terms of field of view, in terms of fidelity, this is all going to improve. And we have rudimentary haptics so that when you get shot or the zombie touches you, you can feel it. But this is also going to get massively better. And this is all going to get massively better through a technology ecosystem outside of us, that as the hardware improves, our experience gets better automatically.
Yeah, so in a digitally saturated world, experience is king. So retailers, they need new upscale social experiences. We're also noticing that millennials are spending more time and money in experiences as well. So just as an example, the reason why we've gotten a space in Hillsdale is the landlord, reached out to us and offered us a very competitive rent deal in order to get us into their space.
Yeah, and it's a operational intensive business, and there's a number of other companies who are doing what is called location-based VR, and we see the space in sort of these 4 quadrants. There's these things that are we call attractions. Fundamentally, a walk-through passive experience. There's a lot of things that you can touch. Everything's mapped. And it's higher in immersion, but it's difficult to scale out in terms of content, right? It's very difficult to change one experience to the next from day to day. Then there's arenas. And these are multiple thousands of square foot in space. And these are fundamentally much closer to laser tag. And we see these as akin to sort of the go-kart businesses of the past. And the difficulty of scaling that one is going to be around real estate. It's very difficult to make the economics work. And even if you can make it work, you can't put a whole lot of these very large spaces everywhere. And then there's arcades, and there's thousands of arcades out in the world, and they use the same kind of hardware that you can get at home, and it's the same experience, and it's targeting people who don't have the hardware at home. And we think for it to win, you have to be the most scalable to create that network effect and ecosystem, and also be the most immersive. And that's why we designed Sandbox to be a standard format, very easy to swap out content, whether it's narrative or in the future esports or educational content. It's just a platform. And economics make it work and makes it possible to scale, and all of that starts from a great product that people actually want.
And we built a team to win. I've been building games since I was 13 years old. Previously, I bootstrapped a company called Blue Tea Games, and we were building casual games title for the last 10 years, building one of the top game franchises for hidden object games. And Siqi Chen, he joins us as Chief Product Officer. So we've known each other since university. But what makes it really interesting for Siqi to join us is he's a 2-time founder himself. And his strength is a blended domain of both growth and product. And Michael Hampton joined us recently as the head of studio. So he's been building AAA titles for the last 5 to 10 years. And what his best title is Assassin's Creed. And before he joined us, he was in Sony VR, where he created Blood and Truth, which is the most anticipated VR title.
Great run through on the deck. And maybe we can start on, I could just say a little bit about sort of, my reaction originally with the company and some of the things that caused me to kind of turn the corner on it. So I think the first thing is, this is the kind of thing that if you don't have the experience, if you don't actually try the product, it's just really easy to be skeptical about it, right? I remember, when we first started having this conversation, where I was like, okay, VR, that's not a very hot market right now. I kind of don't get that. But wow, there's also this retail component. You have to sign all these leases. There's kind of this hardware component, as well. And then on top of that, you're like making games. So then there's like all this like content.
I think we told you that. We're like, these are all the reasons why you shouldn't invest.
Right. And so I think that was such an interesting thing to like start out with as the anchor, where I think I came into this the first set of conversations being just default kind of skeptical about where this was, and it wasn't until and I think this is something where you have to see the product, and then I think it's super interesting in the deck that that you guys actually anchor towards acknowledging the difficulty of where the market is, as opposed to potentially like the pitch could have been, Steve, you could have led off with like VR is amazing, and like kind of gone through maybe a set of the quote unquote cliches that maybe we've seen for years about VR, right? So I think by actually going negative, it actually felt more real, and it got me to think over time that each one of those things that that we ended up talking about, which is it's like, yeah, this is actually a bet that location-based VR is what will work, not not in-home. On retail, it's not a bet towards the success of the future of malls. and the future of these retail spaces, it's actually kind of a bet against it. It's actually saying like, look, there's actually really attractive retail opportunities because of the fact that everyone's scrambling to figure out, what to do. On the hardware, it's not like you're trying to build all this, unique, expensive hardware at mass where you take inventory risk and all that stuff. You're actually mostly using off-the-shelf, hardware. And then, I think on the game side, it was interesting to think like, oh, okay, you're building the games, now, but there's actually a plan to potentially, actually publish, right? And so I think each one of those things, I think initially I was sort of like, okay, I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to be this full stack, startup where you have to solve the entire problem all the way down from the content, the technology, the distribution, and get it all to align at the same time, as opposed to saying like, hey, actually, we're betting on malls to succeed. We're betting on, in-home VR to succeed. We're betting on being able to make a stream of hits, yourselves. So anyway, so I thought that was really interesting and something that like got me to, significantly change my, point of view about it. And then I think, the funny thing is I think there's some products where you can kind of get a sense for what it is just through the deck, and you don't have to really use it. This is like completely different, right? Like this is something where you actually have to go suit up and, have the experience to be like, wow, this is, like a completely different thing. So anyway, so I think those were some of the parts, and then I think that this is also an area where I think the fact that there were already proof points on a store by store, each of the locations actually had some unit economics, and you could talk about it. And by the way, I think one of the parts about it is the fact that it was such high occupancy, just based on the fact that people just liked it, was great. The fact that maybe we'll get into the movie theater kind of Hollywood analogy on this as well, is if you have a movie theater that has 2 movies in it, then and it's such a wow experience that you bring your friends, like that's amazing. And the fact that it's only in a couple places sort of feels like, okay, yeah, maybe you can actually have several dozen of these things in every city on the planet, right? Which is sort of an interesting part. So for this section of the video, I think it would be awesome to actually, let's just do a director's commentary kind of version of the deck, and let's actually talk through each of it, and then we can get some back and forth also on some of my reactions as well. So I know the first slide of the entire deck often has a tagline or has a something that sort of sets the stage for everything following. And so why don't you talk about this choice, which is to say this is the holodeck company. What does that mean?
Right. So Steve and I went back and forth on this, right? Like I am a Star Trek fan, and holodeck is like something. Oh, that's just a word, right? And I think it's not a word that other people knew, right? Like, and so
it'd
that
be
was
more
a
difficult in
bit of a
Asia,
debate.
but since we're basing this in the U.S., this definitely makes sense.
So what do you think about that word that we chose to use?
Right. I mean, I think for me as somebody that also grew up watching a lot of Star Trek, I think holodeck is a really interesting way to to position things. I think it's very much aspirational, right? Which is I think good. But then I was also like, all right, we're like, the current set of technology in VR, like we're a far away from that, and so let's hear about like what that actually means.
Yeah, I think this was a risk on our part too. I mean, the thinking was, the VR market, funding market, capital market has like turned a bit. So would it? And we've gotten a lot of mixed feedback about this side actually too, which is like, oh, do we want to say this or do we want to say the opposite? And so we decided it was kind of unavoidable. It was always going to be an elephant in the room, so let's just get it out of the way and explain that we are actually the solution to this problem.
Right. Yeah, you have, I mean, the whole first section is really kind of negative, right? Which I think is, is not usually the approach that we see, in these decks. But I think at the same time, like literally people talk about VR winter, right? The same way that there's other winters going on, but one of the specific ones they talk about is VR winter. So I actually think that any DAC would have needed to acknowledge that somehow, right? And the choice would have been to do it kind of near the end, right? As this is why we're going to work even if the ecosystem didn't, versus trying to tee it up at the beginning. So I actually what the way that I felt with it was, if you're going to go with something negative at the beginning, it's a bold decision, right? So I was like, this is bold. Like, let's see what these guys have, next.
This was kind of risky in my head, in the sense that do we feel like this is a fair comparison? Are we unfairly pejorative to at-home VR experience? This is how I do feel about the comparison, but I don't know what the reaction was to this slide.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, no matter what, VR is the best tech demo that anyone's ever seen over the last couple of years. I think almost everybody in their very first, the very first time they put on a headset, it's always a wow experience. I've not met anybody that thinks that it's not a wow experience. So that said, I think the introspection that everybody has about VR is why haven't I been into this? And I think the common blame is actually probably content, right, as opposed to the experience. And so I do think that this is kind of an interesting thought of, is it that it's a socially awkward thing, or is it just the content itself? And so I was actually surprised, because I think the other way you could have gone with this is to say the content's not there because it's not enough of a breakthrough. We're going to go and talk about how great we are at content,
right.
And as a result of that, this whole section about the disappointment of VR causes, I think, whoever the viewer is to have an introspection, to be like, do I agree with this as the real disappointment or not?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. This is definitely how I felt about it as an enthusiast.
Right. And I think subsequent to the investment, the way that what I definitely use as in explaining it is, hey, we've all had the experience where one person in the room has the headset on,
yeah.
And then everyone else is like, what do you see? Is it cool? And then they're like, this is so cool, and how unnatural that actually is, and how antisocial it is because only one person can have the experience at a time, right? So I think that definitely does resonate. But anyway, so it's an interesting
and obviously the choice of content versus hardware is self-serving, right? Because if it's just content, then people can just make better content. So okay.
And I also feel by the way, the other thing with a deck like this is that a lot of times people come in with a Series A deck where they have a lot of metrics, they have a lot of data, you can talk about it, which you guys actually have. But because of where the industry is right now, simultaneously there's sort of this need to actually do a lot of context setting before you even get to, by the way, all of our stuff is sold out, right? Versus if this were a category where everybody thought it was really hot, if it were just short form video, app, you basically probably lead with traction metrics, from the first or second slide, you basically go right into it.
Yeah, I think that this is, we thought this would be a strong slide, just explaining the social bit of it, right? So I don't think we had really any reaction.
Yeah. So I was going to say that, I think this is something that you mentioned actually over dinner, I think even prior to seeing the real deck, which is the fun to play and fun to watch, component of this. And that really resonated, that landed really well with me because I have a whole other separate thesis, investment thesis, which is the idea of video native products, right? That basically you have YouTube, you have TikTok, you have Instagram videos, you have Facebook videos, where there's literally now billions upon billions of people who are viewing this stuff. And so any product that then generates video as part of the usage automatically has a leg up in customer acquisition. And so the fun to play part, I think that is sort of a given. It's the fun to watch part that I found super insightful, because in the same way that, for example, if somebody came in and pitched a fitness product, fitness app, that generated really cool looking videos as part of like using the app, right? Or the other place that might show up is if you watch like Twitch IRL, there's always people painting and there's people like doing kind of funny things. All of those that generate video, like I'm always kind of leaned in on that because that is this like sort of current growth mechanism and loop that is working really, really well. And so this sort of like was super obvious. That's like, oh yeah, like that's actually like a key insight.
Yep.
So let's talk about the Asia thing as part of this. I'm super curious for you guys. Like maybe you can talk a little about this. Like the fact that this was created in in Hong Kong, incubated there, and then now you're very much focused on the U.S. market. But at the time of kind of the early investment rounds, it was mostly in Asia. And so like how did people perceive the sort of Asia connection? And then maybe I can talk a little bit about how we view it here.
So when we first started out, when we were pitching to investors, even media about our product, I think their questions were more about straightforward assumption. They first asked us, where did you buy your technology from? Right, that we have told them we built it ourselves. Okay, so who built your content? And we said, no, we built it ourselves. So there's a lot of assumptions that we've seen in the beginning. So I think that kind of just something people expect from Hong Kong is just that it shouldn't exist here. So,
Right.
Yeah.
So I'll give a couple of perspectives on this. So I think one of the interesting parts about anything that works outside of the U.S. that then is tested in the U.S. is like there's real consumer behavior risk, there, right? And in particular, I think Asia is a really interesting one because I think we're so used to in Silicon Valley reading about how amazing these companies are going in China in particular. And there's always a question of like, wow, that's like amazing, like ... It could only work in China, like question, like, or maybe that's a question, right? Like, could this maybe only work in China? And I think in the early years of China's startup ecosystem, it felt like the entire flow of ideas was, things would get invented in the United States and then they would basically be copied in China, and that was sort of the perception was, in the early days, like I remember even seeing a side by side of like somebody had taken Tumblr and literally copied like even the CSS and like and that was sort of like, oh, they're just copying things, right? And then the interesting part is I think now we're seeing so much cross-pollination actually, back from Asia to the US. And so I know that, Connie Chan and Jeff Jordan, who worked on our, Lime investment, which is, now they're doing scooters, but originally, prior to that, it was a shared bikes product. And I think the idea there is that, wow, because the consumer behavior actually worked in China, you could at least, and by the way, you get these really interesting things. You get wallets, you get digital wallets, you get integration into other modalities of transportation. That behavior, if it works, in the biggest market on the planet, like you have to really ask yourself, like, could it work here? And if it does, it might be huge, right? And so I think one of the things that I experienced when in Asia is that there are more VR arcades. Right, there are more, of these kinds of location-based entertainment, and so then the question becomes: is this an Asia thing? Because of the fact that like it's the market's already more primed than the U.S. Like that becomes like a real like risk in the investment, right? And so I think what was very helpful was that by having the San Mateo location, by having the Bay Area location, you could go experience it. You could talk to folks that had never been to a VR arcade, and maybe their entire comparison point is just, is literally just in-home versus this, and they could get really excited about it. And I think this is an example of something that like landed a lot better in the Series A as opposed to the seed deck, where it was like, like, yeah, you're sold out, but is that a Hong Kong thing?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, for this one, it's, this is the first numbers slide. It's like, well, it is at least a graph that goes up and to the right. But, like we have a lot of context here. There's a little bit of repeat usage. Yeah, what's your reaction to the first numbers?
Yeah, I think so. So we ended up wanting to get this graph, of course, in spreadsheets. So we could really look at like kind of what was really happening, and sort of we're trying to understand, was it like a weekend thing, was it a weekday thing, like trying to understand all of that. And then I think the repeat rate, like I think there was a real debate about what it was, right? Because I think you have to ask yourself, like, there's one version of this which you would believe, which is this is novelty effect. This is something where people are just like, because VR is such a cool tech demo, having this like VR plus like experience, of course everyone's gonna try it once, right? And then are you investing in like a go-kart track company, or like paintball, or I've done paintball like twice in my life, right? Is it like that? Or do you believe that it's going to be something that this is actually a movie theater that just happens to have 2 films, at the time of the investment, 2 films, now 3 films, right? And in that case, it's like, well, like if the entire movies industry were just 2 films, would you then say, oh, this isn't going to work because people, will only try it, once or twice, right? I think that becomes kind of the, the point of view. The other thing that I think helped me on it was that I, through the process of working on the investment, ended up having multiple experiences with the product, and I definitely felt like after the first time I was like, oh, I know that I should go for headshots. I know what character, what enemies to expect in which wave, and so then the second time I was like much better, and I felt a sense of progression, and I was like, oh, you could kind of imagine how you could have kind of a multi-user account and this and that. But this is definitely a real debate. Like you're investing into something that basically, like if this were a mobile app and you were like, hey, as a mobile app, you're gonna, only 18% of users, use this more than once. Like that would be like not a good thing. And so I think the fact that you monetize right away, Sandbox monetizes right away, and also there's the sense that it's like, oh, this is just what the platform looks like today. I think that's what kind of got me over the hump.
I think we shared some numbers.
Yeah. So yeah, you shared some numbers on the sales per square foot. So I have like a whole other random experience with this, which is over the years I have sat in on a bunch of, just like for my own personal thing, pitches from restaurants. Right, and so if you ever go to a restaurant pitch, by the way, restaurant pitches, they're the best, because what happens is it's very different than a venture capital pitch, because you usually bring a bunch of your friends, and then you meet the chef. They make the entire menu, they make all the drinks, and then you basically just hang and eat and drink, and then at the end you're usually not hit up for $1 million, you're hit up for like $10,000. So it's like an amazing, anyway, it's a great experience. And so I happen to know a little bit about sales per square foot. I've never done a restaurant investment. However, I've been to a bunch of them. But the one that I have done actually is I did an investment, personal investment many years ago in Boba Guys. And so because I actually knew a little bit about retail and sort of sales per square foot, I actually called the Boba Guys founders as part of this and asked them like, hey, are these numbers actually good? And like, how would you think about it? And is this going to be easy? What are the retail dynamics going to be like? And blah, blah, blah. Andrew Zhao, who is the CEO of Boba Guys, did talk about some of the pull from the retail market in terms of wanting these kind of millennial-friendly, Instagrammable, sort of experiential locations that drive, potentially can drive foot traffic. And so that actually helped me a lot in, understanding that. And I think that may be unusual, meaning that, you may find that most tech investors have not done anything in retail and don't understand anything about retail. And so I think like on this particular one, like we just happen to, like both be able to talk in the same language because I had some of this prior.
Did you say the numbers are good?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the Boba Guys thing also is kind of interesting because it is so Instagrammable, and they drive so much. If you've ever been to a Boba Guys in the Bay Area, there's always a line. And part of the fact that there's always a line is because it's a really young audience. The drinks are very colorful. The look of the store is like a certain look, and so I sort of felt like, oh yeah, like you can get all of those benefits but then also have like software, and technology as the driver, as opposed to boba, bubbles and like whatever, which are great, but that's definitely not a traditional venture capital investment.
Right.
So cool. And then I don't have so much to say about this except that it seemed the question basically comes down to, is this something that you can repeat, right? Is it location by location? I think in this particular case, what you can definitely see with, if we go to rideshare, right, and maybe we can talk about Postmates a little bit as well, is that within rideshare, once rideshare works in a single city, it's sort of an independent network, and you can kind of imagine how then you just kind of stamp out rideshare in all these other cities. And then not only that, each city becomes easier and easier and easier because you kind of learn how to jumpstart each city, and on top of that, you also get a point of view that you do accrue some advantages, because by the time you get the big cities in rideshare, SF, New York, LA, filling in like an Austin is much easier because most of those people actually already have a rideshare app installed, right? And so I actually looked at this a little bit like the fact that Steve, you had done so much on games and content development, et cetera, and we can talk about content risk. But Siqi, the fact that you had actually done hyperlocal growth at Postmates, made it more convincing that you guys would know how to actually grow city by city, as part of the investment. Do you guys want to talk about like this slide and how you thought about it?
Yeah, the thinking behind this slide is what is the end game, right? So, we've done games long enough to know that content is king. In order to win the market, you have to own the content, right? So the way we see this, that's why we have to grow as fast as we can, so that once you have like hundreds of stores, right, and you're a game developer and an IP holder, who would you want to work with, right? The one that can bring you the most money and distribution.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I think this is one of this slide is one of the pillars around the. You thought that this was a games company. Actually, it's a publisher, right? Mm-hmm. I almost think that like if you wanted to go around the VR, like the first couple slides, we had talked a little bit about starting negative on VR. I almost wonder like if. In the retelling of this, what I often do is I actually will just say, there's the 4 things that are really difficult to invest in, and then it's like, by the way, here's the truth about the 4 things, and this is like clearly one of the ones that sticks out, which is that the company is going to be a publisher one day. Oh, and actually maybe I'll say one other thing about the slide is the mental calculation in my head is. The way that the company basically looks and acts today, all the way leading up to the point where you can have third-party, game developers on your platform, that there will be a transformation, kind of at that point. So it's almost like, the question in my head is almost like, wow, how do you get this company capitalized and move quickly to get to that, point as soon as possible? Right, that's almost like the question that it begs. So, yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
The competitor graph.
Okay. Yeah. Should we just skip ahead?
Yeah.
When do we go all the way to the
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
Previous.
Okay, great. Cool. Yeah. So talk about like how you thought about the different axes here, and like what are the things that you think about?
We wanted to put our competitors on a plot, so we thought about what makes us different, and at a time we felt like we wrote down the things that are different, right? So embodiment is super immersive. We don't do the you can touch all the walls and the tables, right? That a lot of other companies are doing. We're not doing thousands of square feet. So, some of it was exercise on how do you turn what can be perceived as a weakness into a strength, and what's the right way to plot it such that we're in the top right corner. I mean, this is the same exercise every startup does when they're fundraising.
Right.
And the two things that we thought we win on is like just the immersiveness of it by virtue of the social, and how scalable it is by virtue of the standard format.
Right.
And the strength of the unit economics.
Right.
And from that perspective, we plotted it. And then as we plotted this, we realized too that these quadrants, we want to label these quadrants too, because, like one of the things that we trying to not do is like we are one of 12 VR LBEs, right? We want to be its own thing and also trying to be intellectually honest. That's why we're not the only company in that top right quadrant.
Yep.
And yeah, so we thought about that as like, okay, there are actually these three categories that we know, right? There's the equivalent of a Disneyland dark ride. There are these large go-kart style laser tag arenas, and then there's arcades. And we want to be a different thing. And here's how we can justify we're a different thing, because that combination of scalability and immersiveness makes it a new format.
Right. Yeah. So what I was going to say here is that with the benefit of hindsight, of trying more of these, a couple different products, in the space, it's funny because it's like you always, like every startup wants to put themselves in the top right quadrant, as you were saying. At the same time, I actually just think that there are just different like DNAs of teams floating out there, right? You have a couple folks, that are approaching it basically from the film world, and they're building a whole thing. And so for them, the immersiveness, the storytelling, that's the most important part. They're probably ahead on, IP licensing and having like kind of quote unquote, sort of household name characters, that are in there. And so that's like one bet that I think as an investor, if you wanted to take, you could try and, back onto those teams, right? I think that's one. The other thing is that there's definitely another set of folks that seem to be thinking about this almost as like kind of a theme park plus kind of thing. Very, very large format, kind of, spaces. The average Sandbox VR room is like, it's like 1,000 square feet plus or minus, right? There are folks that are out there with thousands of square feet, right? Trying to create these. And so I think one of the questions is, okay, well, if you have the theme park DNA, like if you could build the next like set of, Disney theme parks, that's actually potentially also a great business,
yep.
Right? And so I think to me, actually, the interesting choice and the debate that actually went on a bit in the team is, I would actually say that if you went for a really, really large format room, household character names, etc., you could argue that like from a purely experiential standpoint, that there are other players that maybe are further along than Sandbox. At the moment that when we originally invested, because it was primarily based on the one kind of minimum viable product version of Deadwood, and so I saw that as like, is that a strength or a weakness if you believe in the scalability of a smaller format room, right? And so I came into this thinking of if you're going to bet on a theme park plus, film plus, arcade plus, or gaming plus, like of all those DNAs as kind of the root, that I would bet on the games piece, like more than anything else, because I think games and maybe film would be the other one, but those two feel like they're the most conducive towards creating something that you could do maybe every week or maybe even every day once there's enough content. Right, and so, but I think there's a real debate to say like, oh well, is Sandbox actually the best experience on the market, today, right? And is a large format thing actually a quote unquote better, more of a wow experience for consumers? And so I think you're actually making a real trade-off here in the experience. And I think the non-obvious part, I think for people, for an investor would be, would you rather own a small number of large theme parks, or would you rather own something that feels more like it's something where there's dozens of them in every city, right? And so I chose, I saw this as a bonus, but I think, that's something that needs to be conveyed. And then maybe we can talk about the team a little bit. Mm-hmm. Cool. So I think within the context of this investment, so Siqi, you and I know each other for like 10 years or whatever. And then Steve, you and I met through the course of this. And then I met Michael actually post investment. I think one of the things on this was that I felt like, and this is a little bit like the Asia to US thing as well, was that number one, we wanted to make sure that if there was going to be a team that was going to focus on the US because we thought the US was like a really great market for this and it could work in the US, that you'd have to end up with a whole office and people and everything that are based in the US, which we've done. And then I think the other part of this I would say is one of the pieces we were trying to diligence for was how important was IP licensing as part of the team, and that's something that we also felt like A16Z could uniquely help because we talk to the media companies all the time. We talk to a lot of the IP holders, but that was sort of like one of the gaps that's felt like it existed here, that we should at least try and like neutralize the advantage of, if we were to invest, that we should neutralize the advantage of competitors by having, real discussions with people, or hire some folks that made this, really, that would be equivalently kind of insidery relative to the competitors. So, and then I think beyond that, I think the technology, the gaming piece, that all kind of made sense. I think I think the other piece of it, again, I thought that actually the Postmates experience was extremely relevant and important, was just more that like, oh man, this is going to be like a retail, large retail like chain that is going to need to employ one day many thousands of people on the ground, and it was going to be extremely operationally complex. And so I think the other thing that was missing, which I know we've now filled, is sort of somebody who's going to handle all the complexity of retail expansion, buying new leases, getting into new leases, construction, like the whole kind of workflow around that as the company began to scale. Okay, guys, it was really awesome having both of you here. Thanks again for spending the time.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that candid look inside the pitch meeting. I was so excited when I was behind the scenes watching the conversation unfold, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did when we were filming it live. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. We've got plenty of other content coming, and we hope you enjoy that as well. If you feel inclined, we've got a comment thread open on this, and what were your big takeaways from watching the pitch meeting? What surprised you, or what inspired you for the next time you're fundraising and working on your pitch deck? Leave us comments, and we'll see you next episode.